streaming.
So we're all set, Herb.
Good, okay.
Got it.
There's it.
Somebody.
I got it. Oh, no pun intended.
Great.
All right, it's 6:33. I'll call the meeting to order. And do we have any public who would like to comment about anything? There's nobody here in the room with us.
There is public on my screen. Can you see that? Do you want to, if you would like to speak, if you click on the reactions button at the bottom, you can click on the raise hand feature, and then we can see that you'd like to speak if anybody would like to.
They could identify themselves.
We have two screens full of people, but I'm not seeing any raised hands.
No.
Okay, well, this is for the public. If as we go along, you want to say something, you can ask to be recognized. I don't guarantee that will happen, but it often does. And there's another public comment period, 10 minutes toward the end of the meeting.
Let's go occur before the executive.
Session. Let's review the board norms and
We do have a
oh, no, we don't. That's Lee.
Oh, I'm sorry.
He's not a guest. Okay, Dick, would you want to review the norms for us?
Yeah.
Since they
Going
changed
faster
since
than
last
normal.
time?
We last time passed a new set of norms that instead of being just smart are now smarty. So as a board, we will make sure all our students are our first priority. We will honor the distinction between governance and administrative responsibilities. We will set ends policies, executive limitations policies, board management delegation policies, and the governance policies, and measure our performance against these policies. We will set goals for our work that are smarty, specific, measurable, attainable, results-oriented, time-bound, inclusive, and equitable. And we will periodically check in on these goals. We will conduct ourselves in a courteous and professional manner. This means we will respect time, follow protocols, speak to the point, be prepared, bring closure to open items. We will make fact-based decisions that are all in the best interest of our stockholders. We will clearly and effectively communicate with all of our stockholders.
Stakeholders, I think.
Well, they're stockholders too. So we pay them dividends called education.
Ah, okay. Thank you. The first item on the agenda would be the consent agenda.
I move the consent agenda be approved.
Dick, is there a second? And okay, again, because it will be easier for me as we go along, particularly with two screens. Try to use the hand raise feature down at the bottom of your screen here, but I did see Lindsay raising her hand for a second, so we'll call her in a second.
Hey, Herb, you're a little muffled to me. Is there any way you might be able to speak just a little bit louder?
Okay. All right, all those in favor of adopting the consent agenda, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. That passes unanimously then.
I move the minutes as mailed of the.
Wait, I think we have a hiring item.
No, because we already approved that.
I beg your pardon, you're right.
I move the minutes of the policy committee and strongly recommend that as you deal with 4.3, you make note of the need that while we're going to go to the first phase of 4.3, we as a committee, we're terribly concerned by the multiple meanings of the word agenda. And later in the meeting, we will ask for permission as a committee to clarify some of the things that we found somewhat problematic. So I move the approval of the minutes, and that means, and Jeff attended, even though he's not an official member, I would ask that he also be able to vote. That's Jane, Deb, myself, and Jeff.
I don't think it would be appropriate for Jeff to vote, since later on, we have an item to actually put him on the policy.
So I asked for an exception to that because he attended and participated and was very effective.
Well, I do not think it would be appropriate for him to vote. I really don't think it's going to be an issue. Would those members of the policy committee who wish to adopt those minutes, please raise your hand. Just the policy committee.
Excuse me, Herb, who was the second on that?
Oh, you don't have a second. I beg your pardon. Would someone care to second Dick's motion?
Deb, can you?
Deb is seconding the motion. Deb is seconding it.
Thank you.
All right, I'll recall for the yeas. Are there any nays?
Hey, Alex, your hand is still up.
There's a time lag here. Okay, any abstentions? Here's that passes unanimously by the policy committee then. And we can go now to the school goal presentations.
Okay, so can you hear me all right? All of you who are not in the room? Okay. So you can see we've got all of our principals here. So thank you all for joining us this week. I know many of you were here last week as well, so thank you. I am going to share my screen and we are going to review the BRSU goals, and then we are going to scroll through the school goals, okay? So if we can wait until the end to ask questions, that would be helpful. There might be a couple of just minor differences in some of the slides, as some stuff was recently updated. So just be aware of that. You'll see it. Nothing substantive. I will share my screen, and then for those of you presenting, if you wouldn't mind just letting me know when to advance if I'm not great at that. Okay. All right, Skylar, do you want to get us started?
Sounds good. Go ahead and advance. Perfect. So the state of Vermont requires our school systems to set goals in at least 2 areas. And these are the 2 areas, academic proficiency and safe and healthy schools, that we are required to set goals for. There are a couple of other areas which we could potentially set goals, but these are the 2 that are required. And going into last year, we knew that it would be a year like no other, and it certainly was. So we decided to stick to these 2 areas that are required. So you can see the levers in each area on the bulleted list, just super quickly. And go ahead, Randy. So the academic proficiency goal that we had set for last year was based on iReady, which was our computer adaptive assessment that, if you recall, we transitioned to from NWEA MAP. And we were looking at the consistent implementation of the curriculum model and instructional model. And we are aiming for 65% of our students representing historically marginalized groups to achieve the annual typical growth, which is a measure that iReady is a normed assessment. And it projects based on the student's biological age, grade level, and performance on the fall assessment. This is the projection that a student typically gets in a year. And that it's important to note that iReady is normed on about 4.5 million students across the country. So it was an ambitious goal, given that when we set it, we didn't necessarily know what we were going into last year. But we aimed high nonetheless. So you can see, and this will go into historically marginalized groups in a second, but before we do, if you look at the 2021 results, all students, so the N size there is about 1,000 kiddos, give or take, depending on when they took the assessment, if it was within the assessment window. So it's about 1,000 kids. 47% of them met their annual typical growth in reading, and 42% of them met in mathematics, which is something that we saw, and it was actually a national trend that, as a result of the last year, if we want to think about it in terms of learning loss, I don't necessarily like that term. I think the term lost instructional time seems to have impacted students more in mathematics than it has in reading. And that's kind of a national trend. And we saw that to be true for us as well. Go ahead, Randy. Click.
Fine.
Okay, so as I said before, we know you can see this the way that it's organized, and I apologize. I just actually dropped this color-coded one in there. The one you probably have in your packet is less pretty, but you can see off on the left, the 47% and 42% are represented respectively. And again, this is percentage of students, so we're talking about bodies here. Okay, so 39% of our students on IEPs met their annual typical growth in reading, compared to 48% of those students that are not on IEPs. Okay, and just to contextualize that, about 13% of our student population are on IEPs, so that 39% is representative of 13% of the total population. Economically disadvantaged, you can see there was about a 7% disproportionality, if we want to think about it in those terms, compared to their non-economically disadvantaged peers. I actually don't have a good N size on the economically disadvantaged number. We keep that really protected. And then to explain the historically marginalized groups on ethnicity and race. So the state has a definition of what it considers historically marginalized populations. That includes Pacific Asian Islanders. It includes Black and African American students and other ethnic groups that we don't have a large enough N size for to report out on individually. So what I did is I took all of those historically marginalized groups based on ethnicity and race, combined them to get a large enough N size to be reportable and non-identifiable. Okay. And you can see in reading, there was no difference in performance for those historically marginalized students based on ethnicity and race. However, in math, it was a 12% disproportionality. So that was second to, is the largest gap, second to IEP for math. Students on IEPs, 30% of our students were proficient or met their annual growth, I should say, and 43% of non-IEP peers met their annual growth. Go ahead, Randy. So it's important to note that we're transitioning from iReady, which was our computer adaptive assessment that we use locally. And at this point, you're all likely familiar with SBAC, which is our state assessment that's required that we take once a year. However, in the year the 2019-2020 school year, the assessment was canceled. So this is our performance based on last year, and this is compared to the state. So you can see we were right on target with the state for ELA and a little bit under for math. Go ahead, Randy. So here, this might be alarming. There's a lot of information here, and there's a lot of, I guess, suggestion as to what's actually happening. But one thing that you should know is that the year 2019-2020 has been omitted because it didn't happen. But you can see kind of a regression. So one of the pieces of data that we didn't include in this is the fact that this is really, really consistent with the state averages as well. So over time, the SBAC started being conducted in 14-15. That's when we transitioned away from the NECAP, which was a paper-based assessment, to a computerized assessment in the form of SBAC. So you can see that we've continually declined in math. And it was a little bit all over the place for ELA, but based on last year's performance, we are down. But again, that is relatively consistent with the state. Go ahead, Randy. So given that SBAC is the state assessment, I know that attention is beginning to be paid to the annual snapshot that the agency has put out, despite all of its flaws. SBAC is the metric that they use to report out, and it's the kind of the public face of our academic achievement when it comes to, I don't want to say quality school, but when people are moving to the state, I mean, the most forward-facing document is the annual snapshot. So our goal here is to use SBAC as a metric. So it is a performance metric, which is a shift away from growth. The idea is that growth will happen locally, and some of my school-based colleagues, principals, you'll see will use that growth metric in the form of iReady in some of their goal setting. But our goal as the larger umbrella of the SU is to return to pre-pandemic levels. And it's something that I think that we're going to be able to achieve. Hopefully just with the consistency of the instructional model and the fact that we're back in schools, and there's significantly more teacher time in front of kids, instead of having to navigate new learning almost on a week-to-week basis. So that's where we are for academic goals for this year. Go ahead, Randy. When it comes to safe and healthy schools, which is the other goal setting domain, we had looked at a 10% reduction in significant incidents reportable to the state. So those significant incidents include violence, hazing, harassment, bullying, significant property damage, events that are undeniably classified as significant. So what we did see over this past year was a 50% reduction in significant incidents. And I know, having talked to principals and teachers, that decline was likely a result of less students in school, some students who might have a harder time with the transition periods in schools. There were less transition periods as well. Some students who may have generated a bunch of significant incidents decided on distance learning. So there's a variety of factors that contributed to that decline. Go ahead, Randy. So our goal for the coming year, we're going to be conducting the psychological sense of school membership scale. It's an 18-question Likert-based scale, so it's a 5-point scale. We'll conduct it, we said September, we actually had to bump that to October. That'll happen this month, and that will be students across schools. It'll allow for us to look at individual building outcomes, but also the umbrella of the SU. So the goal here is to get the baseline this month. 0.5 mean increase is really significant because it's a 5-point scale. And if we're looking to improve the sense of school belonging, 0.5 on around 1,000 kiddos, it's going to be a significant increase. So that is what we're looking at for a metric and our goal for this coming year, or for the present school year, I guess, because we're already deep. Thank you.
Okay, so transition to Carolyn.
Hi, everyone. Most of you already know, but I'm Carolyn Perillo, the principal at Courier. So we as well have a goal that is in the area for academic proficiency, and then also a social emotional goal as well. For our academic goal, we are looking to have a 10% increase that is using the iReady data to indicate the consistent implementation of BRSU supported curriculum and instructional models. So looking for a 10% increase in the number of students that score at grade level and above in reading, specifically for grades K to 3. We've been really targeting our efforts because that's where the work has been for improving and focusing on instructional practices. So that's why we're focusing on those grade levels. So looking at results for winter 2020, and this is not an exact comparison, but it's what we have to work with. We had 57% met or exceeded given the NWEA assessment. And then in the spring at the end of last school year, we were at 52% who met or exceeded, keeping in mind that we did not have the spring for 2021 for a comparison. And so if we're looking at a 10% increase, given the fact that our K to 3 population currently with our really small N size is about 40 students, we're looking at about 4 students going from below standards to meeting the standards. Next slide. As mentioned previously, looking at our root cause analysis and impacts that it has on our literacy and where students are at, certainly the pandemic has had an impact, as it has with all of us, but also our high poverty community has an impact on that. Next slide. Things that we are working towards to help us meet our goal. we'll continue to use data to inform our instruction. We last year had a committee, we had actually 2 active literacy committees, one that was looking at our overarching literacy goals, one that was specifically looking at vocabulary development. And we also had another subcommittee that was creating a more comprehensive local assessment plan for us to be able to implement this year. So that plan is, we have a really good solid draft, and it is being utilized, but there are a few parts that we are still tweaking that we'll continue to tweak this school year. We also will continue to engage in professional learning activities to help deepen our understanding and strengthen our implementation of best practices specifically for literacy. As I've mentioned before, we had most of our teaching staff that engaged in a mind play course through the Stern Center that was specific to the science of reading. And we have some other professional development opportunities that we're looking into and pursuing. Next. Our second goal is the safe and healthy schools goal. And we've spent a lot of time analyzing our data. And as you heard Skylar mention, that there was a significant decrease. And we certainly had some theories. One was, is it our students that are not attending school? Are those the students that might have increased our numbers? So we did a pretty in-depth crosswalk, and our findings were that for our school, that was not the case. And when we spent a lot more time working together as a staff to analyze the impacts of what might have been in place last year that would have had a positive impact in kids' success with social and emotional needs, what we found was their personalized space was one thing that had a great impact for them. A lot less transitions. And because we needed to for safety, we had to spend a lot more time with clarity of expectations. We truly believe that a lot of those components helped our students be a lot more successful. So we tried to analyze as deeply as we could and then implement as many of those strategies this upcoming year as we possibly can. So what we wanted to, we know that as we are going back into what seems and feels it looks more normal, that we are definitely going to see more of a challenge. And so what we decided to do as a leadership team is look at a 5-year pre-pandemic average and have that to be our goal. So if we were looking at pre-pandemic average of 5 years, it was an average of about 301 write-ups. And so if we were going to meet our goal for next year, it would be 270 or less. Some of the ways that we are going to continue to help support the needs, social and emotional needs of our students. Right now, the entire staff is involved in a book study of Teaching with Poverty in Mind by Eric Jensen. And where our hope is that we will be working with Bill Rich, as you know that the BRSU has worked with him much in the past as well, and take some of our new learning with Teaching with Poverty in Mind, which has a lot to do with brain-based practices, and be able to help have on the ground work with Bill so that we can take some of that new learning and really put it into practice. And we also have identified there's a lot of gray area between our two goals, because what we had identified with the needs of our high trauma, high poverty community is significant need to help improve vocabulary instruction. And so those are some commitments that we've made as a school for this year as well. And of course, our continued support with positions such as our social emotional interventionists to be able to help support the needs of our kids.
Thank you, Carolyn. Hey, Rosanna.
Hi, I'm Rosanna Moran, principal at the Dorset School. And I'm going to start with a review of our goals from last year. And we looked to increase by 15%, an improvement from fall to spring in the percentage of students meeting proficiency in foundational skills in both math and reading. And we were focusing on foundational skills because if they don't have the foundation, then they can't continue on to the higher level thinking. If you could go to the next slide. Here is our increase in reading. We went from 46% at or above grade level to 67%, which was an increase of 21%. However, we know that our students in poverty and our students on IEPs are not making the same gains. This is the overall, all students in the school. We also see that vocabulary and comprehension, both informational and literary text, are areas of weakness for us in reading. Next slide, please. In math, we increased from 23% to 49% on or above grade level, which is an increase of 26%. We did have a nice increase. If you look at the numbers and operations under the domains, there was a nice increase there, and that is a foundational skill. But again, students in poverty and IEPs not making the same gains. I think it's also important when we look at this increase to keep in mind that the first time they took this was in the fall, where we were just back. Not everybody was here 4 days a week. We had many students who were taking the iReady assessment from home. So the results of the fall are not nearly as accurate as the results of the spring. So that could be a bit inflated in terms of the improvement. Next slide. Our goal for social and emotional learning. We had taken at the end of, during the 1920 school year, we had taken the survey supplied by SWIS, which is the school-wide information system that's recommended by PBIS. And the questions on it that we really focused on were, do students at your school treat each other with respect? And do students at your school treat adults with respect? And it was only 40% of students who agreed that they treated each other and adults with respect. And so our goal was to increase from 40% to 65% on that. And then we were looking for a 10% reduction in behavior referrals, in monthly behavior referrals. Next slide, please. So if you look here, I started up on the top left with the average referrals per day per month, and that is for the 18-19 school year. And then this slide in the middle is the 19-20 school year, which was interrupted. And down in the bottom right is the school year just last year. So we had quite a reduction. If you look at the black line and the red line in each of those slides, it's showing the median score, but what we were looking at was the 75th percentile. And let me see, in the 18-19, 9 out of 11 months were over the 75th percentile, which is not good. In the 19-20 school year, there were only 7 months recorded. There was nothing in August. I think that was a day or two. Only 3 out of the 7 months, which is an improvement, were over the 75th percentile. Then when we go down to the 2021 school year, nothing was even up to the medium. It was down closer to the 25th percentile. And we looked a lot at why that was. In some ways, we felt meeting the goal was pretty meaningless because everything was completely different. We found that the majority, probably at least 50% of our behavior referrals came from 5th grade through 8th grade rather than K to 4. And that's where we saw the largest change in how their day went. They went from 4 content area teachers and 5 specials teachers to 2 teachers per day. They really just interacted with their homeroom teacher. And then we had one of the specials teachers, which would come in and facilitate all of the specials online. Then they started interacting with all of their 4 content area teachers, but it was all within the same classroom. So there were no transitions in the hallway of students going back and forth. And we had found in the past that looking at the time of day data from Swiss data, that the times of transitions were where we saw the most behavior referrals. So it was a highly structured environment, far less movement, far less interaction with different people and different expectations. And we also were providing 2 recesses per day, which we really felt was a big positive that came out of last year, which we have continued into this year. Next slide. So these are our goals for the current school year. So this is a lot of words on here. I'll try and distill it down into the basic points of it. What we're looking to do is really hone our MTSS process. We'd like to start and focus on K-2 because if we look at K-2, that's going to have the biggest impact on the whole system. If we were to focus on grades 7 and 8, we might fix 7 and 8, but then next year we'd have the same problem to fix again. By really focusing on K-2, our hope is that will continue to impact as those students move up through the grades. So we're looking to tighten up the local assessments K-2, and this is specifically in reading because reading impacts math. Reading impacts everything. So that was our most foundational skill. So we want to tighten up the local assessments. We want to tighten up progress monitoring, which means how are we checking week to week or maybe every 2 weeks? Are the students making progress rather than a test that we take in September and then moving to January and seeing did they make progress? We want to make sure that we are checking that more frequently. And to use during our intervention block an all hands on deck approach. So we would have the classroom teacher, the special educator. We're working in grade bands. So for example, in grades 1 and 2, we'd have 2 classroom teachers, a special educator. We have an interventionist who is a reading specialist who will be helping there. We have any paras that would be in the classroom helping the students. And we also, as soon as we get fully staffed, we'll have a para who will be focused specifically on helping with those interventions in reading. We have requested an additional reading specialist who will focus on the upper grades, which will allow that reading specialist to focus on specific needs like looking at the language that's used in math and used in science. And it will help our current reading specialist to focus on the primary grades. The progress monitoring, if you look at number 7 and number 8, we have a lot of tools for local assessment and progress monitoring in the primary grades. We don't have those tools as readily available in the upper grades. So what we're looking to do this year is to develop a library of those tools so that we really have a rich way to approach not only the teaching of the interventions, but how to measure if students are making progress. Next slide, please. This is the first of one of 2 social and emotional goals. This is the respect goal that we have. We would like to make sure that we didn't give that survey last year on whether students treat each other and adults with respect. We will give that this year. And we will be looking for a general reduction of behavior tracking forms, as well as seeing that percentage of students feeling that we treat each other with respect. Next slide, please. We are also looking at having a full-time counselor. That is something that we will be requesting from ESSER funding. We're hoping that the schedule that reflects less student travel throughout the building. We now, this year, instead of 4 core teachers, we have 2 teacher teams. So 7th and 8th grade has 1 teacher who does math and science and another teacher who does the history or social studies and ELA. We have that same model in 5th and 6th grade. And we're hoping that fewer teachers to interact with and learn how they run their classroom, that will help us. And we're hoping to keep the behavior referrals below the 75th percentile for 8 out of the 10 months. Next slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosanna. All right, Amy Harlow, our new principal at Bloodwork. She's going to present this year's goals with Bloodwork.
Yeah, so I'm just going to start with from day zero for me. I'm so happy to be here with all of you and getting to know my school and your community. And so we are moving forward from, I started going to the leadership team meetings before I left my last job and was working with Jackie to create goals for this year. So that's what I'm going to go over. Next year, I'll be able to talk about what I did last year. So our goals this year for academic proficiency are to increase the number of students, and we're really going to focus on iReady typical growth. We had in reading, 45% of our kids were meeting the goal, and we want to increase that to 55% in our building. So just raise it by 10%. The teachers are really familiar about what the typical growth is, and now working towards their stretch growth as we go through the different testing windows. We also, in math, we want to increase the number of students meeting their iReady typical growth in from 36 to 46%. We were, like the district, lower in math, and hoping that we have kids in school 5 days a week, that we can really work through that. So developing a coherent and comprehensive and systemic universal system of multi-tiered system of supports in academics. So what I'm working on now with the leadership team is to make sure that we have a system in place where we're meeting with kids, meeting with teachers and teams, and not in silos. We're meeting to with the idea that that it takes each of us to reach all of them. So in much of the same way that the other principals have reported, we're making sure that we have kids, we have our teams looking at data, making goals at the team level, at the data team level, each grade level, and then bringing that to the different teams that need to work with kids for at tier 2 and at tier 3. Well, so there's our action steps. Academic priority will be informational text. The continuation of professional development and quality instruction, instructional practices, teachers as designers. Where our instructional practice priorities will include collaborative conversations, data teams, and tiered supports, and proficiency-based learning, instruction tied to the BRSU proficiency maps. So for our safe and healthy school goals, implementation again of a coherent, comprehensive, and systemic universal system of multi-tiered support systems in social emotional learning. So we're responding and we're supporting students at every level, at tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. So creating a baseline for the number of learning disruptions to ensure and also to ensure that tier 1 expectations are in place. Implementation of the multi-tiered system of supports with daily advisory morning meetings, and development of a universal guide for behavior response. We worked really hard on that before school started, and we are implementing it. It's a new way of looking at how we deal with kids, and making sure that all kids are in their classrooms during their tier 1 instruction, and giving them support at other times in both academics and social emotional. By the way, the artwork is from our amazing art teacher, Casey. So our action steps for social emotional is to create that baseline for the number of learning disruptions, ensure that tier 1 expectations are in place, the implementation of the multi-tiered system of support. Oh, I already said that part. And the development of the universal guide for behavior response. I think that 2 things got mixed up. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. All right, and we're on to Manchester. So we've got Deb and Betsy.
Hey everyone, I'm Deb Fishwick. I am one of the co-principals at Manchester Elementary Middle School. I noticed here that we don't have an introduction slide, so we will review our academic and safe and healthy school goals for the 2021 school year, and we'll revisit the 2021 school year and then share our goals for the 21-22 school year. So we'll go through. Betsy and I will do this together. I'll be presenting information on academic proficiency goals, and Betsy will do those for the social emotional. Randy, can you advance the slide? So our academic proficiency goal for the 2021-22 school year is to increase the percentage of students meeting proficiency in math from 30 to 40% and ELA from 45 to 55% on SBAC. And that will bring us back to that baseline. And last year, our goal in mathematics was to increase, to have 100% of our students make 1 year growth in iReady. Again, it was an assessment that we were not familiar with, and we had students follow the learning pathways. But as you saw in the original presentation that Skylar presented, that students did not make that math growth. So we're hoping that next year we'll have about 65% of our students make at least 1 year growth on their iReady math assessment. Randy, next slide.
Hi, I'm Betsy Bimo, the other co-principal. To speak to the Safe and Healthy Schools goal, this year we are striving for no more than 15% of them students having experienced 6 or more dysregulated experiences as measured by our office referral data. Last year, as everyone has spoken to, we had a 1.36 rate of that, but we do not feel that was an actual normal year or accurate data for what we're going into this year. But because of all the COVID and protocols and the way that we built robust grade level pod teams, it made a big difference in how our students responded and behaved. Next slide.
So we did our analysis looking at data for last year. We looked at our historical data and we continue to do that. We looked at the 2016 to 2019 academic data based on the SBAC assessment, as well as the 2021 SBAC assessment. And Manchester Elementary Middle School students have not shown significant growth in the areas of reading or mathematics. And our iReady data was also analyzed as we looked at setting our goals for this year. I'll let Betsy talk about safe and healthy schools, and then the next slide, once she's done speaking to her data analysis, we have some data about our SBAC historically over time.
So the baseline data that we're going to use is from the 2019-2020 school year, where we had 21% of our students experiencing 6 or more emotional dysregulation throughout the year. As I said, last year it was 1.36, not a typical year for sure. Okay.
Next slide. So as well as looking at our iReady data, we looked at the number of students with our iReady data who were on grade level and who made growth on iReady, as well as those who were not on grade level and made iReady growth. And that's still very raw data, and we're still working through the analysis of that. But here you can see on the left side of your screen the SBAC math data over the time period from 2016 through 2021. And it's broken down in levels. Level 1, not meeting the standard or below grade level. Level 2, nearly meeting the standard. Level 3 is a proficient or at grade level, and 4 is exceeding expectations. So you can get a sense of where our data has been over time. Next slide. So we have some action steps that we've taken at Manchester Elementary Middle School, including the implementation of an MTSS model that includes a daily intervention block of what I need, as well as including regularly scheduled PLC meetings. One of the things we did with our schedule this year was we were very deliberate in placing our interventionist. We have 2 reading interventionists in grades K through 6 and a math interventionist through K through 6 as well. We've built teams, including 1 special educator primarily at each grade level. There are places where we were not able to fill those needs based on hiring, but we've assigned interventionists to smaller bands because what we were finding was an interventionist was really struggling to meet the needs of so many kids across so many grade levels. So now it's more defined. So we have a reading interventionist serving 1st and 2nd, a reading interventionist serving 3rd and 4th, and a math interventionist serving 5th and 6th. And then the teachers work collectively in a PLC meeting, and they look at data regularly and they build groups based on what students need and the whole team provides interventions for students during a win block or what I need. Those PLCs, like I said, we've built in that time for planning and to allow teams to come together collectively to look at the data. We will continue to hone our skills and use quality instructional practices, or referring back to teachers as designers. And we will build on our proficiency-based learning and making sure that our instruction is tied to the BRSU proficiency maps. Next slide.
The action steps we're taking already in the social emotional realm is that teachers and the social emotional team will implement daily advisory and morning meetings. We are implementing both level 1 and level 2 PBIS. We have the regular scheduled professional learning groups, which are meeting weekly. Now we have a health teacher, so we're very excited to have regular health classes, and small group and individual meetings for school counselors. And perhaps the strongest response will be to establish a consistent behavior response to student needs. So it's a swifter response just in time for what a student needs to be able to re-engage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Betsy. All right, Jennifer.
Hi, I'm Jen Turner, principal at Sunderland Elementary. You can see here that 2 of our goals were academic proficiency, safe and healthy schools like the rest of the schools in the SU. Those were what we focused on last year, and you'll see that now there's an additional goal around personalization that's very much connected to our innovation initiative that we're engaging in. Next slide, please. So first, looking back at our 2021 goal, we were looking for a 10% increase of students meeting their mathematical growth. It was not an apples to apples. We moved from growth in NWEA and moved over to growth in iReady. We did not meet this goal, and there was actually an unfortunate 5% decrease. So when the leadership team looked at everything, we ended up feeling that there was a very large impact from COVID. As Skylar had mentioned, these goals were developed in the spring, in early spring. And so we did not know that we'd be coming back in the situation that we came back in. So our focus really ended up being on teaching strategies for our new normal, and we didn't really get to focus on the action steps that we had hoped to focus on. And so we, as a team, decided we wanted to continue this goal. And we have a couple additional steps that we have recommended, and you'll see those in our action steps. So I won't mention them now. Next slide, please. So we are now shooting for the same 10% increase in number of students meeting mathematical growth. The number of students who met mathematical growth last year was 49%. So we would be hoping for 59% this spring. Next slide, please. So the action steps, the first three are actually the action steps we had planned and did not feel successful with. One of them is about engaging in professional learning together around activities that support student exploration and making meaning. Second one is putting time and energy into high leverage instructional practices in mathematics. And then walkthroughs happening during mathematics instruction to so that I'm seeing the instruction and what's happening for students, and I can have the conversations with teachers about those instructional practices regularly. The two goals that we had two action steps that we as a leadership team had wanted to add were increasing our interventionist from 60% to 100%. So we're very excited about that. Our interventionist is now with us 5 days a week, and that should have a really big impact. Just making the schedule this fall has been so much easier with that increase in time. And then the teachers have asked to do an activity that really looks at the different mathematical domains and how they progress from kindergarten to 6th grade, so that the best approach to skill development and concept development can be tackled. Next slide, please. So the second goal, very much like the other schools that you've heard from, was around a decrease in office discipline referrals, and we were looking for a 10% decrease, and we far exceeded that. We only had 30 ODRs last year compared to 60 the year before in the same time frame, so the fall to March when the closure happened. 33% of those were in physical aggression, and the year prior it had been 58% of our ODRs in physical aggression, and then 43% were disrespect, which was up from the 33. So we realized that, like the other teams, that there were a lot of contributing factors due to COVID. And so we don't believe that this is directly connected to just strategies that are being put in place. Like we do second step implementation and our PBIS system. So we have rewritten this goal, and we're going to tackle it again and see what happens. Next slide, please. So now we're looking to have that 10% decline in ODRs, total ODRs. We're focusing still on the second step taught with fidelity. And we want to compare back to our last year that was not impacted by COVID. So 77 office discipline referrals occurred during the 18-19 year. So we'll be looking for about 8 of those to decrease. So like approximately like 69 in this school year. Next slide, please. So our action steps, we're going to continue to really focus on the second step. We did, we worked on implementation last year, but we want to continue to keep that focus. Our PBIS team will do regular check-ins on progress with that. And we will highlight monthly themes from the second step in our PBIS meetings that happen, and bring back what we recommend to our teachers. Then just like I'll be doing walkthroughs within the math time to see what's happening, I'll also be doing walkthroughs during morning meeting to specifically gather evidence about what's occurring during the teaching of the lessons of second step. Next slide, please. So our new goal, very excited about having this third goal. We all last year, we worked to create a plan to have an innovation initiative in place this year. So we started out with a baseline survey, and we looked at the data from, we only did our 5 classroom teachers because they're going to be the most directly involved in the PBL, the project-based learning that we're going to be doing. Our unified arts teachers will definitely be a part of that when they can, but they won't necessarily be there as consistently. So that's why we did the survey with the 5 teachers. So the baseline survey gave us 3 areas that we decided that we would be looking to focus on: learners given voice and choice in their learning, students demonstrating their learning in multiple ways, and teachers partnering with students around learning. So our goal for this upcoming school year is to see in the end of year survey that the teachers do, 2 out of 3 focus areas have an improvement for each teacher. Next slide, please. So our action steps, we will be providing professional learning activities with our instructional coach, Guillaume, around project-based learning and the tie to teachers as designers, as previously mentioned. The instructional coach, in addition to working with me to do professional learning opportunities, she also will be working with the teams to it's 2 cohorts, K-3 and 4-6. So she'll be working with those teams to develop units, plan the implementations of the units, and then reflect on the process and see how we can improve it and move forward in a better way the next time. I will be, along with the coach, we will be looking to constantly provide exemplars of where things are happening within and around our state or in other places, so that teachers have kind of vision for the work. And the pictures here are our makerspace. We are excited. It's come together really nice, and we're excited to have kids in there working and creating. And you'll see that there's a green screen for videoing, and there's sound stations for podcasting. We got a couple doodle pens, and we have a Cricut. We've got some workbenches that are counter height. So it's going to be an exciting place for kids to really engage in this new kind of learning for them. And I think that the teachers also, I'm already seeing excitement from them around this initiative. So it's very promising. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jen. So I would like to take a few minutes, Herb. Is that okay to see if there's any questions? I know we've got a full agenda today, but I'll turn it over to you for questions.
So please use the hand raise if you could. Dick has a question, I think.
Yeah, I thank you very much for sharing all of those very laudable goals. But there are a couple of concerns that I potentially have. First, our focus seems to be on the lower sections and the lower grades, trying to improve that bottom end performance. What I wasn't hearing was that COVID affected every learner, or virtually every learner. And I'm concerned that I didn't hear much about methodologies that you're going to implement that cause all of the learners, especially the top end learners, from recovering from the deleterious effects of COVID over the last 18 months. I certainly understand teachers only have so much time in the day, but I also know that if I were a parent and I were looking at the other data that has been sort of published, some of it not very accurate, and if I listen to the people around town, many of whom have pretty talented kids, they want to know what our school is doing to have those, particularly at the higher end and the grades 5, 6, 7, and 8, kind of both recover, but also advance equally aggressively.
Dick, what would you think of asking the principals to give us a supplemental report at the next meetings? That's a very wide-ranging set of questions, and I'm not sure they can really do it justice in the time we have tonight.
That's fine. It's just, if I were listening to this presentation, and I've listened to a lot of stuff, I don't hear that higher end stuff and the middle stuff and the higher grades. And I would love to be able to walk out and say from a very non-professional way, here's what our principals are doing for everybody. And it's fine with me if they want to submit to the board kind of the response to that kind of concern.
John, I think is next.
All right, thank you. So thank you everyone for the presentations and all the analyses. Kind of one topic I was curious about, and I may have brought this up last year when you did this, so I apologize for being repetitive from year to year, but one thing I noticed that was absent from one demographic I noticed that was absent from your analyses was any mention of by gender and gender achievement gaps. And I know statewide that females vastly outperform males. And I'm curious to what extent, I guess, you know, if we're framing as a research question, is there a statistically significant difference in our gender achievement gaps? And does that, and also not just for academically speaking, but you spoke a lot of about discipline referrals. Is there significant difference by gender when it comes to discipline referrals? And, you know, is not including gender or biological sex in your analysis, is that a conscious choice? Or is there other reasons why that is not something we're choosing to look at? Especially, we know nationwide, statewide, there's a huge gap in all standardized tests. Thank you.
Skylar, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, so I can tell you from the perspective of the SU data and the historically marginalized group that I broke out, the reason gender doesn't appear there is because it's not an identified historically marginalized group according to the state. So what I wanted to provide you with was an accurate depiction of what you could expect to see on the annual snapshot. So that, from that sense, it was a conscious choice just so that you could have consistency from the SU perspective.
So perhaps the question for Skylar would be, in a future report, might it be possible to address what John was talking about?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, we can. I mean, we can pull it for sure. It's just in the effort to maintain consistency again with what I know that there's been talk on the SU board as well as TNG around the annual snapshot. So that was the conscious choice, was to omit gender and include the other titles that constitute historically marginalized groups as defined by the state.
Lee is next, and then Jane.
Where is the microphone in this room? Can people hear me, or do I have to?
Or should I put my
Yes, they can
microphone
hear
on
you.
my?
Nope, they can hear you.
Okay, making sure. My question, I guess, is mainly for Skylar, although it's kind of for everybody. But a lot of people talked about kids making typical yearly progress on the iReady data. It would seem to me that if you're norming the data on 4.5 million people, 4.5 million students, that the typical annual progress should be made by 100% of the people. That may be completely wrong, but I'd sort of like to know what the national number is that we're comparing to when we say we're going to improve it by 10%. You know, national number is 80, and we're going from 45 to 55. I'm less impressed. If the national number is 30 and we're going from 45 to 55, I'm much more impressed. So
Yeah. So I can attempt to unpack that, and I actually went a bit deeper. This T&G meeting was it was expressed to me that it was a focus on the schools data, but for the VRSU board, I broke down iReady over time in comparison to national norms. And we were relatively consistent. So I know some folks that are attending tonight were at that, and I know the recording is also on YouTube. So we have that significantly deeper look at SU data when it comes to comparing to the norm group, and the 4.5 million is broken down to project against performance from just last year alone as well as the last typical school year that iReady has data for is 18-19, and that student performance or how that norm group played out is also available on that presentation from the VRSU board.
So did that answer your question, Lee? Well, it answered it that they have the data.
Yeah, so Skylar, you mentioned, I believe, that we perform very similarly to the national norm as far as percentage of students making annual typical growth.
Yes. Yep. And we saw, and just to clarify, so the impact of COVID was clear when it was showed to us by iReady, the 4.5 million kids that tested in 18-19, the last typical school year, they experienced significant shifts nationally. And as Randy had indicated, we're a couple of percentage points either above or below what the national average was on performance for mathematics and reading from this past year.
Before we get to Jane's question, my screen at least has switched to a sort of portrait gallery. Is there any way to get back to the regular grid?
There we
Oh, there
go.
we go. Okay. Thanks. Jane.
Oops.
You're muted. Jane, could you unmute yourself, please?
Sorry about that. Okay. A couple things. Carolyn, I just wanted to give a shout out that I thought you really followed through the QI process. Having led QI teams before, I really heard that you went through that process with due diligence. And even through the part about the self-reflection and the root analysis, which I think is often people leave out. And you were able to talk about how your theories actually kind of failed, but it led you to some really good, meaningful change. I thought that was great. And I may have missed it, but with respect to social, emotional, the definition of respect, I'm not sure that I heard how respect was defined. I understood it was measured through a Likert scale, which I understand, but I would wonder about that, how that gets really quantified objectively. And I also just wanted to say I really shared Dick's concern. I noted that too, that I was concerned about how all age groups were going to be addressed with equitable concerns about education.
Yeah. Or would anyone like to respond to Jane before Paul did?
I just wanted to thank you for your presentations. I think it's it's really sobering to see the data about how kids really suffered last year with COVID. And I appreciate that you focused on the kids who suffered the most, because they will have the hardest time recouping their loss. So I appreciate that your goals are not too ambitious. They seem like they should be achievable, because those kids, it's just scary to think how far back they've fallen. So thank you. Good luck.
Ben, go ahead.
Thanks, Herb. I just wanted to also express thanks for all the work that you're doing as principals in this really challenging time. The report was helpful. I think, personally, I'm much more intrigued by the sort of examples that you shared of the work that you're doing on the ground in the schools to support students and what's different amongst the different schools. It was really helpful to just get a little bit of insight in that way. And one of the things that I heard was this tension that exists between strengthening the systems that we have and this sort of like opportunity and need to change that's there. And there's so much that's happening right now, that's sort of a daily challenge in operating under this, sort of trying to be normal, but it's not normal, and seeing a need for doing some things differently, but just trying to establish the normalcy. And it's a really challenging time and place to be in. So I just appreciated that, the work that you're doing with that, and hearing those moments where you're saying, this is what we're trying to do a little bit differently, the focus on personalization and project-based learning, the focus on that I heard in Dorset on reducing transitions and the more time with individual teachers, knowing individual students. And I just thought there was some interesting insights there that I appreciated hearing, and hopefully we'll get more of that as we go on through the year. So just thank you.
Thank you. Lexi?
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to say that I thought that all of the presentations were really great, and I found it really nice that there was such a large push on focusing on mental health. For example, I know MEMS, you said that you have a health teacher, which I went to MEMS and that was never something we had. And so I think it's really great that we're focusing on health and mental health and physical health as a whole, because I think that's something that's super important and just something that I personally advocate for. So I found it really cool that there was such a large push that after the pandemic, that's something that we are trying to focus on.
John?
Just a quick clarifying question with iReady. Is the annual growth metric, is that a norm? And I'm sorry if you've already said this, I'm trying to clear it up. Is that norm referenced? And are we comparing it to, or are there specific cut points? I'm trying to understand, is it norm reference based on this whole population across the country during the pandemic that determines that annual growth cut point? Or is it, let's say if the whole country, has the pandemic, will that adjust the growth metric, or are those pretty fixed and static? Does that make sense? Am I being clear?
Yep. Yeah. So the initial annual typical growth, right? It was normed on, I'm not necessarily sure if they used 1920 data because it was affected, the spring assessment was affected by COVID, whether people did it in person or not. I know I'm much more familiar with the frequency with which NWEA would renorm, and that was on a 4-year cycle. We wouldn't see the impact on annual typical growth for iReady until this year if they renormed every year. I'm not sure. I have a meeting with them next week. I can actually ask that specific question, with which frequency do they renorm? But we were held up against the national performance based on last year, as well as the 18-19, the last typical year that they had. So it's a great question to know, and I'll find out.
Thank you. I have 3 questions which I don't think should be answered tonight, but possibly could either be in a supplement or at least next year. I'd be interested to know which people were involved in setting the goals, how the goals were set, and what kind of meetings, and what kind of communications, and how the numbers for improvement were actually chosen. Please don't attempt to answer that tonight. It's just something for the future. I don't see any other hands raised. Are there any other questions or comments about any of the principals' reports? Seeing none, then, thank you very much, everybody. And let's move to the executive.
Excuse me, Dick.
Rosanna had a hand.
Rosanna had a question.
Oh, I didn't see a hand up.
Oh, that's fine. It's more a response to the question about respect and the definition of respect. And one of the things that we're utilizing our middle school advisory for is to develop that definition of respect with the students so that they know what it is. When we looked at our data for behavior incidents, the 3 highest ones were disruption, defiance, and disrespect. And really in the adults talking about it, those 3 things really came down to disrespect, whether it's disrespect of the adults, each other, your environment. So that's why we're focusing on that. And I think the only way to do it is to make sure that the kids develop their own definition of respect.
Thank you. I don't see anybody else using the hand raise function. Is there somebody who wants to wave frantically because you can't use the hand wave?
Jen Turner.
Oh, yes.
I would also piggyback on what Rosanna is saying, just to share that part of PBIS is to have children go through a process of what it looks like, sounds like, and for each, so respect is one of our guidelines, is one of our expectations. And so for every setting in our school, our children think about what it looks like and sounds like to be respectful in the setting. So the definition per se is something that could be developed, but they do go through a process of what it looks like and sounds like to be respectful on the bus or in the hallway or in the classroom.
Thank you. Anyone else want to be heard? Please use the hand raise if you do. Got a question.
Am I good to talk?
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to follow up just because I did some quick Google foo and went into the portal for iReady. And I just wanted to follow up with John before it got lost in the ether. The last norm update was 2015-16. What they do every year is they examine the bulk of the 4.5 million tests to determine whether an update is needed. So has it shifted significantly from the literature I'm looking at now? It's the norms are from 2021. So based on this last year, it's not likely that they're going to use that data because, as you can imagine, it's significantly different in a lot of different ways because there's a lot of influences. So it looks like they examine every year, but the last norm update was 5 years ago.
Thank you. Anyone else? Bear in mind that we have quite a lot left on the agenda still. All right, let's go to the FY21 year-end financials, which begin on back at page
It's just a
25
distribution.
to 24.
They're both distributions, right?
Yeah.
So can I just thank principals for being here? Thank you all. If you'd like to stay, feel free to do so. We're gonna, have some, I'm sure, great discussions later on in the meeting. So if you want to stay, please do, but there is absolutely no expectations. You're all very, very busy and working hard. And I appreciate you all coming in and spending your evening with us. So thank you.
Anything you particularly want to call our attention to?
No, the biggest piece of information there obviously is that we have a larger surplus than we anticipated. And say we anticipated that to happen. We were conservative when we were projecting anticipated numbers during budget last year, not knowing how we were going to be operating for the rest of the year. We wanted to make sure we were anticipating enough money to do things like enrichment activities and any sort of additional program services that we might have been able to accomplish. A lot of that did not happen. So we ended with a higher surplus.
And as I said, that was to be expected as we moved through the end of last year. So I've outlined for you where that money is going. You know, the voters did vote to move that into tax stabilization. And we had reserved some of that money for use this year to reduce the amount we were drawing from the ed fund. So I don't know, does anybody have any questions on the presentation?
If you do, please use the hand raise function. You can just keep track of here. Not seeing any. All right, thank you very much, Sue.
You're welcome.
And Randy, your report begins on page 27. Is there anything that you want to add or anything you want to particularly make sure that we pay attention to here?
I don't know that there's anything specific. You know, it's challenging, and you read that as you know, in listening to the presentations. I bet that if people were to be actually just writing their goals starting right now, some of those might be a little bit different. And we're seeing a lot of kids. I'm sure Lexi and Sam, you probably could offer your insight into this as well, but this transition back has been tough for a lot of kids. I'm seeing it from colleagues in different parts of the country as well as within the state, and our system is not protected by the impact, you know, from a social emotional lens. I think about what we just heard about the kind of dips in discipline in behavioral data from last year, and kids are coming back and they're struggling. So I think that a year from now, when you're getting goals, I think you're going to hear a lot. So our schools are trying to respond as well as they can to who our students are right now and what their needs are. But it's definitely challenging. So in my, you can all read the report. I did provide a pretty comprehensive summary at the end of a review of the annual snapshot. I'm hoping that we can sort of move on from that because I don't know how much more I have to say, but I hope that that's useful for you and informative about what it actually is and what it contains and where the data comes from. And I'm thinking, Celeste, I thought that I had written, and I don't see it in here, like a recommendation.
Yeah,
I did. It's later.
This is the top of page 29. And perhaps you could just read.
Oh,
it
yes.
aloud.
Okay. So thank you. I looked at the top of page 29. You will see a paragraph, and I'll read that to you, I guess, for Herb's recommendation.
Yes.
So based on the previous board meeting discussions, I recommend the Taconic and Green Regional School Board submit a request to the Agency of Education to review and evaluate the presentation of the annual snapshot data, as well as the explanations provided to readers about what the data is representing about the district. Information is difficult to comprehend and does not provide enough information to guide the reader's understanding. This request would include details of the BRSU snapshot profile to support the board's concerns. So you can, consider that recommendation or not, but based on the review I did, that was my recommendation to you. So I will stop talking and happy to answer any questions you might have.
That recommendation is the subject of the next agenda item, but does anybody have any comments or questions relating to something else in the superintendent's update? Jane?
You're muted.
You're muted, Jane.
Okay. Herb, I think I may have just missed you saying something right there at the end about that it's going to be mentioned later about the recommendation.
It's the very next item on the agenda.
Okay, thank you.
What I was encouraging folks to do is hold off comments about the snapshot until we get to that item. But if there's other comments or questions about the superintendent's report, this will be. And I see a hand up from David.
Yeah, I won't take a lot of time. I just want to say to Randy, I think that I noticed on your summary, on your report, your monthly update, that you spend a lot of time at the end of your overview being very, very supportive of your team. And I think when you're in uncertain times and the boat is floundering, if you're keeping a very close eye on your crew, that's about the best thing you can do. So I just wanted to commend that, because in these uncertain times, you've got to keep your long-term goals very much in mind, but you got to keep your eye on the guys, the people that are helping you row the boat. So I think you're doing the best. So I feel like this is a very positive report, even though there's a lot of uncertainty around. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Melanie?
Randy, I don't know if you can even comment on this really, but regarding the stakeholder engagement regarding current program infrastructure, I assume like the idea of a new middle school. First, I totally understand that needing to have an extended timeline, but I'm just curious what kind of stakeholders you're referring to.
Yeah, great question. So this first information gathering is going to be current and previous students. So current middle school students and some high school students, teachers and parents. So that's going to be this initial group. And we're planning on getting this information out in the next couple of weeks. Probably not next week, probably the week after.
Thank you.
Sure.
Ben?
I'm just wondering, considering the sort of the first part of it, a lot of what you shared, Randy, about just the challenges that schools are facing right now, and that at the same time, we've got a fair amount of certainly statewide and national critique being focused on public schools. And we're about to disband the community engagement committee, but I am thinking about whether we ought to be doing some work, some PR work in a sense in the community about the value of public schools and the really hard work that people are doing. It just seems like we're at a time when it's hard to fill positions in schools. Teachers are being, overburdened in a lot of ways. There are morale issues, and this is not, I'm not targeting BRSU, Taconic and Green. I'm saying this like from my conversations with people around the state. This is reality, really broadly, and people are not, communities are not jumping in to say, hey, like we got to support our schools. And if anything, we've got really vocal groups that are raising a fuss about, issues that they have, problems that they have with school around critical race theory or around whatever it might be. And that seems to be the big attention. And I just feel like it's almost like we need a positive campaign to say, like, our public schools are essential. Like this is in a lot of ways the bedrock of our democracy, is a strong and healthy public school system. And if we don't have that, then we're really in deep trouble. And that's not the message we need to send, but the message we maybe need to send is just look at this great work that's, like, this is a really challenging time. We've got people that are really pouring their hearts and souls out to support our communities. Let's get behind them. I don't know. I'm just sort of like thinking that out for the board.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on, Ben. I mean, that's a great assessment of the situation. It is not unique to us. It's throughout the entire country right now. It's not unique to Vermont either. And I think that's a terrific idea for the board to think about. I'm happy to partner on that. I've been thinking about that exact same idea, not from a board lens, but from a, infusing those positive sparks into our system, because there's a lot of them happening, and I think we could use a dose of it. So I'll just offer support for that. You as a board can talk about that. I'll step back, but I think it's a good idea.
John?
Thank you. I just want to piggyback on Mel's point about she brought up middle schools. And I'm wondering, Randy, do you think, I know you're spread thin as it is, and that's a big task in itself to start that discussion. Is that something where it might be helpful for you if we hired a qualified consultant to kind of, organize and lead that work, and and figure out the logistics. And of course, you'd certainly be a part of that, but you have a lot of day-to-day fires to put out. Is that one thing that could be relatively taken off your plate if we could find a
Yes.
qualified person?
So this first step is for me to be able to make an informed recommendation to you. Right now, there's all kinds of opinions. Every single person sitting in this meeting has an opinion about whether or not you should be looking at middle school or not. What I'm hoping to do is to be able to really collect some data from our folks locally to then come to you with some sort of a recommendation. At that point, that's where I will be intersecting with your question. Because if we're actually going to begin to do work, my hope is to have enough information before budget so that we can budget for anything that we might need, such as a consultant or somebody to lead the work at objective third party. But I'm really trying to learn from past experiences, consider where we are as a community, and not move forward with an assumption about a middle school before collecting information from folks who are either currently impacted, will likely be impacted, or have a state.
Yeah, just to clarify my question though, would it be helpful for a consultant to gather the data from those stakeholders, and initially? And I'm not saying we're operating on any given assumption, but to help someone to help you with that.
I don't know. My first thought is that would take a lot of time, that like it would kind of put things off a little bit. I can certainly think about it. I'm not thinking that this is a giant, huge undertaking to get this initial step going.
Okay, thank you.
But I appreciate that, and we'll think about that as a possibility in order to, if we did it would, we'd be looking at probably not having information for till 2022 at some point by the time we got going with it.
Jane.
Yeah, just going back a moment to what Ben and Randy were talking about, and that all school boards are sharing these concerns, or all school districts are sharing these concerns. I'm wondering, does it make sense, or is this appropriate that this might be something we suggest for Jim and David that would be attending their annual VSBA meeting to consider bringing up as a topic?
Either of you want to comment on that?
Just a quick comment that it is a major topic of conversation at the VSBA level, and you might have seen it in some of the communications from VSBA in recent times, because honestly, there are a whole lot of communities in Vermont that are having real difficulties with these conflicts. And frankly, I count us as fairly lucky that our communities seem to be pretty supportive, and we aren't having as much of a problem in comparison, because I can just tell you it's pretty extreme in some communities, these difficulties. And so I think all of us should be very appreciative of our communities and the support that we do get. I thought, Ben's idea was a very good one on trying to pull that support out and make it vocal. But I think we have to recognize that we're pretty lucky that I think we do have supportive communities currently. I sit on the VSBA executive committee, which is 5 people, and the majority of that committee are from districts that are having pretty relatively severe conflicts. So it's pretty typical around the state. So it is getting attention at VSBA, and it's getting attention, and they're trying to figure out what to do about it. But it's a very complex, difficult issue, and I find it's one of the tough things is a lot of school boards are sort of walking on eggshells nowadays, which is not really the best way for school boards to be operating. But this environment is having a significant impact on a lot of school boards and their ability to do their business.
Thank you, Jim. Can we go on then to a related item? And I think Dick has a motion.
Since the board has already authorized the potential production of a letter with respect to this issue, I would propose that we follow the superintendent's recommendations that were articulated in that first paragraph, and that the executive committee be charged to produce the letter with the advice of any board member who wishes to give the executive committee or group, that's David, me, and her, some of your ideas as we compose this, and we'll try and get to it as quickly as possible. So my motion is to propose that the group, David, myself, and Herb, be authorized to construct following the guidelines that Randy recommended.
I'll second.
Second by Jim Salzgiver. Is there any discussion? Jane? You're muted. Jane, unmute yourself, please.
Sorry about that. Okay. I'm really glad to see this has come up. It is something I recommended, and I was ready to make a motion on this, like, a couple months ago. I'm really glad to see it. Sometimes I wish I would be given a little credit whenever I do make a recommendation, because I think sometimes with respect to agenda and minute making, it's important to recognize people who are bringing in ideas. Thank you.
And thank you for being the starting idea on that. Any other discussion of the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, could you please raise your hand? Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. Appears to pass unanimously then. And the next item also needs a motion. Dick?
I move that Jeff Wilson be appointed by the board to be part of the policy committee, whose charge at this particular point is to develop the interpretation and modifications to any policies and bylaws.
This would be to replace Melanie.
No.
Is there a second? John Wilson, was that you making me a second, or you just moving your hand? Melanie seconds it, okay? Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of selecting Jeff to replace Melanie in the policy committee, which is task was described by Dick, could you please raise your hand? Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. I believe that also passed unanimously then, thank you. And we have another motion, Dick again.
I move, consistent with the last meeting, that the board set up a new committee called the Equity Committee to be chaired, because he volunteered for that during the executive group, by our august chairperson, Herb, and that we discuss the remaining nominees, and that if people are not prepared to volunteer for the Equity Committee tonight, that we then authorize the chair to solicit and seek the 5 people who would make up the Equity Committee.
Is there a second? Second by Bennett, okay? Everybody clear on what the motion is? All right. I think we can vote on the motion, and then we'll see if we have people right now. We'll fill up the committee. We need to vote first on the motion. So all those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. Passes unanimously, Ben. I know we already have one volunteer. I know Ben was interested in serving on this. I would really like to see at least one of our students, although I know your time is scarce. I think this is a good area for at least one student to be involved in, if not two. But if we don't have volunteers now, it takes a motion to say how we can fill up the committee. Are there, see Sam.
I just want to say, how often would we be meeting? Because I do really want to volunteer. I'm feeling a little overwhelmed right now with some other after school activities and then applying to college. So after November 1st, I'm like all in, happy to help. But before then, I don't know how helpful and available I'll be.
Well, as it so happens, I'm going to be away from October 13th to the October 28th. And if I chair the committee, I can pretty much guarantee nothing too much is going to happen in the meantime.
Okay.
So aside from that, I think it's up to the committee how often it meets. And off the top of the head, thought is probably no more than once a month for 2 or 3 months.
Okay, then I'm happy to help.
And typically, I know committees have been meeting around 4 o'clock. I don't know that we have to always do that, but that's just a heads up. I don't know if Sam, you would need that to change to fit your schedule, if that would be okay with you.
That works out pretty well. I swim at 6 o'clock, so.
So we currently have 3 members. We've got me, we've got Ben and Sam. It'd be nice to have 2 more. Has anybody thought about tonight to the extent you can actually volunteer, or shall we wait to hear from people? Mel, your hand is up. Is that volunteering or volunteering? Great, okay.
Lexi also.
And Lexi.
Sounds like you have your committee.
I believe we have the committee. Now, if anybody else is,
You can go more than 5.
we could go more than 5, or if anybody simply wants to be kept abreast of when we're meeting, get minutes, you can simply let me know and I'll keep you in the loop. All right, everybody, thank you very much.
Our next job is to set goals, and I move.
Don't we need to vote on that or no?
Yes, we should. That's right. We should actually have a motion to.
Okay, a motion to appoint our 2 students and Melanie and Ben and her to the equity committee.
Is there a second? Seconded by Lee. All in favor of appointing those 5 people to the equity committee, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand.
And the policy committee.
Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. Okay.
Both the communications committee and the policy committee have made previous recommendations for a timeline and some of the purpose. The first concern would be whether to have an equity policy. The second concern would be where should it be put into our policy book, whether it should be included at the beginning, the opening ends policies, or included somewhere else in the policy book. Third is how to effectively incorporate in the policy the definition previously adopted with respect to equity. And the final issue would be to delineate and determine what the wording of the policy would be if it's deemed that there would be a policy. And I make that as a motion. The timeline, I would suggest that it be that the equity committee have a report no later than April.
I got 3 of the first 4 points. Just for me, could you restate them, please?
What do we got?
Whether we have a policy, if so, where does it belong? How do we include the definition of equity?
Well, I wrote where does it belong in the 2 parts.
Oh.
And then last thing is the wording
Right.
of the policy.
And then the committee report no later than April. Is there a second to this motion? Seconded by Melanie. Okay. Any discussion? The hand raise feature. All right, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. That also appears to pass unanimously. And we have one more motion.
Wait.
Oops.
Just want to capture, I think Jane, you abstained for that vote?
Did you raise your hand to abstain, Jim? Looks like you did. There was one abstention. And we need a motion to dissolve the Community Engagement Committee. Dick?
I move that the Community Engagement Committee has completed its task brilliantly. And therefore, because subcommittees of the board are in fact given specific tasks, that it now be dissolved.
Was there a second? Seconded by Deb. Is there any discussion? We're going to congratulate the committee, which I think has already done quite nicely. All right, all those in favor of dissolving the Community Engagement Committee, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. All right, we're on to item 9. Dick.
I move that the recommendation of the superintendent to define all students as from K through 8. And now incorporate that in the policy.
Question, Dick, do you want that in the policy or is that interpretation?
That would, the board asked in the last meeting to define what was meant by all students. And so therefore I would incorporate in the policy the definition.
So
Because that was what was asked for.
So that means we have to go through the approval and adoption
Yes.
process. Then.
Yeah.
All right, and Deb, are you seconding the motion?
No, I have a question after your second. Well, I'll second it and then I'll ask a question. Can I ask a question? My concern about delaying it again is that Randy and Bob Niles and everybody else is ready to go with this policy. We shouldn't put it off any longer. You know, Bob has written articles that are ready to disseminate. Randy's ready to present it to the staff and get working on it. I think we can just call it, put it in the interpretation, which we're doing with all these other policies and we can do that in the policy committee. It's just an interpretation, all students, and we interpret it to mean K-8. It doesn't need to be written into the policy itself, just for expedience sake.
Dick actually just withdrew his motion. Deb is the second. I assume it's okay with you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'll just go ahead, Lindsay.
I guess if the motion's withdrawn, then any questions I had about what we were talking about is that what just happened?
You weren't at the meeting where this was actually discussed. So go ahead and ask.
Well, I guess my only question is why pre-K wasn't included and why I understand our district schools only go to 8th grade, but we do pay for our students to go past 8th grade. So I guess my question was about that. But if we're withdrawing the motion, which is what I just asked, then there's no point of asking that question.
Let me make a suggestion. I think there could be an alternative motion to adopt the superintendent's recommendation, just as Deb suggested, as an interpretation. Maybe Dick could make. Would you?
Yeah, I'd make that motion.
Okay, so Dick moves the superintendent's recommendation be adopted as an interpretation that does not hold up releasing ends policy 1.0. It simply interprets it. Is there a second to Dick's motion? And that is an interpretation. Deb seconds the motion, right? And Dick,
to answer your question, Lindsay, the difficulty is how we would enforce and monitor the 9 through 12, which needs to be worked out. And as we deal with all policies, if we do need to include the high school population and figure out a way of actually influencing what happens and controlling what happens, we would begin to modify the policy. With respect to pre-K, not all of our schools have pre-K, which was why it was left out. Officially, we're not a pre-K through high school system, although we run a pre-K.
So even though we offer the hours to pre-K students who go to approved pre-K providers, we don't consider pre-K to be with our students.
Well, we do, but it faces the same problem that you face once you get beyond grade 8, which is that there's a practical difficulty in monitoring. Randy and then Deb.
Yeah, I was gonna say similarly to that. We don't, all pre-K programming is overseen by the Child Development Division, CDD, and their guidelines, but we can't directly impact the programming of any program that's not ours. So whether or not the board at some point in the future wants to extend to overseeing programming for programs that we don't operate is a very, very big discussion, whether we're talking about pre-K or whether we're talking about 9 through 12. So the board said, recognizing that, let's just get this going for our students because we know for our schools. And then if at some point the board wants to revisit oversight of programming for students, for schools, programming that is at schools that we don't operate, then the board can discuss that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Just as a policy question, Lindsay, it's whether or not we can hold those other entities accountable to our policies, all the policies that we've been reviewing. You know, can we say that pre-K, everybody has to follow those policies and have a way to evaluate that, and the same for high school? And there's really no way that we can do that. It's just a practical consideration.
All right, we need a motion regarding ends policies 1.1, 1.2.
Actually, we have to approve the motion. We didn't vote on Deb's.
Oh, we didn't vote yet on, no, sorry.
I think a lot of us had our cameras turned off. I'm not sure, or I did something wrong.
Turn mine back on either.
It says the host won't let us. Yeah, we've been shut down. We've been.
Celeste, can you just check in if you, as the host, accidentally turned everybody's cameras off?
Yeah, we can still go ahead. While
People can still turn theirs on themselves.
Yeah, just go to the little double dots in the upper right hand corner of the picture and restart the video.
It won't let you. Like I've tried turning on my camera and it says that the host has blocked this action.
Yeah, same here.
I just got a notification when I'm back on. Yeah, I think we're.
We're good now.
Whatever you just did, Randy, seemed to work.
Whatever Randy did work, yeah.
Except for this one.
Apparently I can't do it on that one.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So we need to vote on the motion, which is to
include the definition of all students as part of the interpretation.
Right. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. Passes unanimously.
I move to adopt the revised policy 2.2.
Wait, we need.
Oh, I'm sorry. Adopt the ends policies 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and 1.4, which we approved at the last meeting.
Is there a second? Seconded by Mel. Any discussion? Remember, this is just the last stage. We already approved them. This is just the adoption stage here. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. That appears to pass unanimously. It does, right?
I move to,
Congratulations.
I move to adopt the revised policy 2.2.
Dick, can we celebrate this for a moment? Ben and I are clapping and celebrating and you're running off. So I'm just gonna ask us to take a moment of all the work that's been done to just like celebrate that for 20 seconds. I know we're running late, okay? That is hard work with lots of time, so thank you. Okay, go on.
And I think the Red Sox made us hit a 2-run home run in your honor too.
Oh.
Not that the game is on anywhere in the background.
So
I'm just guessing that might have happened in your honor.
It did. I move to adopt the
Bummer.
revised policy 2.2.
is there a second? Is there a second? Seconded by Deb, okay. Is there any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. That appears to pass unanimously. It does pass unanimously.
In board packet 37 through 39, I believe, or yeah, 39, includes policies and interpretation and evidence 4.3, 4. And 4.4. And I would move to approve those policies, despite the fact that the next item is to authorize the policy committee to clarify the meanings of the word agenda, because it won't change materially the current policy. And if we adopt a better meaning of the word agenda, then the interpretation and evidence are likely to be still consistent and operable.
Thank you. And your motion included both the interpretation and the evidence, didn't it?
Yes.
Okay, is there a second? Second.
Second.
Okay. Is there any discussion? Seeing none. Quick question. Now, Lee, go ahead.
On page 39.
That's 4. 4.4.
Yeah, that's the next one.
Oh, I'm sorry. What did you?
No,
I'm sorry, you're right.
No, I thought this was.
Yeah.
I said 4.3 and 4.4.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What was the point of moving things on Robert's Rules of Order 1, 2?
Probably because I can get one place is enough.
I know, but it was added. After we deleted.
Oh, that's because there was a preliminary routine, and 4.3 was actually removed from the approval process way back at the very beginning. And then we felt that by getting the 4.3 adopted, then the policy committee could go and clarify the meaning of the word agenda, which is actually a change in the policy.
No, but my question is about Robert's Rules of Order.
In 4.4, which one?
One question is how come it's both here and
Well, no, it was
here?
taken out of 1 and put right back into 2. I mean, I'm not sure. If there's a reason for doing it that way, then 3,
But we eliminated that.
Yeah, I think the same thing, that I think it's likely that what happened when this was just a giant sort of mess of a document as we were trying to, because it had been edited so many times. I think that it had been added in and then we realized it shouldn't have been added in and you shouldn't have seen that it was added in, if that makes sense.
We didn't want.
So, but we can go back and I can confirm that with Celeste when we look back. I just don't have it right.
wasn't true at any long and it got added in 1.
No, it
Right,
don't.
I don't think it was, there was a 1 E
Right.
at all. I think we might have added that in. And then realized we already had it later and he took it out, but it wasn't originally there. But I just have to go back to the original list last to
So
look at it.
to clarify things, Dick, would you say that your motion is to adopt the interpretation of evidence as it appears in the packet, except omitting the words following Robert's Rules of Order in 2A?
No.
Once
No,
again, this
I was
is,
just wondering if there was a point to it.
no, there isn't a point. We actually,
That was my question.
as a policy committee, we actually eliminated the double reference when it was a double reference.
Okay, that's
And-
fine.
and
If that's the
so-
point, then awesome. That is a very good reason.
Yeah. Can I make a,
Let's remember there's other folks here besides just the two of you. Deb,
just to, the business about the definition of agenda, if it sounds like we don't know what we're talking about. In some ways, we talk about the work plan as an agenda. Sometimes we talk,
wait, please, we're not on that item yet.
oh, all right, okay, sorry.
We're still on Dick's motion to
Okay. Okay,
4.3 and 4.4.
all right.
I would ask for approval at this particular point, and when we get to adopt, we'll have the correct proposal made by the policy committee.
Okay.
Okay, good.
So again, what you're voting on is just the interpretation and evidence that went with 4.3 and 4.4.
Right, right.
And so was there a second? I believe there was a second.
I don't have the print.
Melanie seconded it. Did you second that motion, Melanie?
Dick made a motion and Deb seconded it.
Seconded. Thank you. All right, all those in favor of that motion, which again is just the interpretations of evidence, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. I want to point out it is now 25 minutes of 9. We attempt to finish meetings at 8:30. If anybody feels strongly that we should not continue, at least until, let's say, 10 of 9, could you raise your hand? Otherwise, I will continue. See the hands up, so I'll go ahead.
In the minutes of the policy committee, we justify why we believe with the multiple definitions of agenda, a clarification of 4.3 with respect to, in particular, the meaning of agenda. There are other potential changes that would clarify the 4.3 policy. And we're asking for board approval for the policy committee to take another look at the wording of the policy as we seek to make it more clear. And so the motion is for the board to approve the policy committee working to clarify the policy of 4.3.
Is there a second? Seconded by Melanie. And there's more explanation of that, by the way, on page 9 from the policy committee. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. I see, Ben, are you up as well? This is the final act, all right? Any abstentions, please raise your hand. Dick, are you abstaining?
No, I'm going to the next
That passes unanimously then. Dick, go ahead.
As we did with the BRSU, because our Jim is going to go to all 3 of these projected meetings, we found that it's particularly useful to empower him with the board's policy proxy. In addition to that, Jim requested, because David, as also a member of our representatives to both all 3 organizations, be appointed as his backup. And so I would make that motion at this particular point.
Just want to call your attention to the fact that we skipped over the work plan which has been distributed. Does anybody have any questions or comments about the work plan before I take a second to this motion? See any, is there a second to Dick's motion? Is there a second to Dick's motion to?
Jim is second.
Okay, Jim is, well, let's pick somebody who's fat as not the fire here. I'll pick Ben in a second. All right. Any discussion about empowering Jim, and if he's not available, David, to handle matters that Dick described? Any discussion? Oh, sorry, Jeff, is your hand up? No.
I just have a question. I have a question. If they are representing the BRSU, can they represent TNG also? Do they vote twice? How does that work?
Dick says yes.
Yes, that is correct.
Well, they actually, the votes are, the SU has a vote. But the SU should represent Taconic and Green and Meadowy and Win Hall. And therefore, one thing we'd ask for you, David and I, is, representing you guys, is for all of you guys to make sure you make yourselves familiar with the resolutions that are being proposed and the changes to the bylaws that are being proposed. And, let us know any sort of comments. We'd be happy, if you're not going to be attending the meeting, to pass along any comments that individuals have on any of those items. And, it's part of our duty. And, we'll report back to you afterwards what actually happens. But to kind of give you, yeah, we'd appreciate input.
Or any other discussion of the motion? I don't think we voted on the motion yet, did we? All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. Appears to pass unanimously. It does pass unanimously. All right, we have an item here about a possible VSBA resolution regarding support of vaccination of youth. Jim, would you like to speak to that one?
Sure, be happy to. We've had some more discussions on the topic of, Jane had brought it up initially, the idea that that it would be, potentially a good thing to have youth be able to get vaccinated without a specific requirement of a parental consent, or potentially for medical providers to determine that the youth could get the minor child could get a vaccination without going through the parental consent. It makes a lot of common sense to a lot of us, but at the same time, it's sort of one of those hot button items at sort of state level, and with some other with some parents and all. And we had some sort of discussions really amongst Jane, Herb, David, and I, and felt that the most sensible approach to actually have an impact would be to advocate for the COVID-19 shot being added to the immunizations that are required for students that already exist. So it's a much softer request, and it effectively accomplishes the same end of allowing our kids, or actually, pushing our kids, sort of mandating kids to get the vaccinated when the vaccination is fully approved, et cetera. So it's we discuss, what we're really talking about at this point, the VSBA resolution process is kind of over for the year, but advocating, I already raised it at the VSBA to potentially get it on the agenda on a future meeting. But what we'd be looking to is for the TNG potentially to take a position that the VSBA should support and advocate for having COVID-19 vaccinations added to the required immunizations in a similar way as to other existing immunizations. So does that cover it reasonably well?
Yes, especially once it gets FDA approval for kids from 5 years 5 years on upwards.
Yeah, and we didn't get into the emergency use authorization versus the full, but I think advocating in a general direction is potentially what we're looking for here.
So Jim, would you like to turn that suggestion into a motion?
Since Jane was the original, I'd kind of like to give her a chance to chime in.
Well, let's see if we have if we could put a motion on the floor next to discussion.
Okay. So I'll make a motion that the Taconic and Green request that the VSBA support and or advocate for a position of adding COVID-19. No, okay. Jane saying she wants to.
Jim, go ahead and finish, please.
COVID-19 immunizations to the list of immunizations that our children would be expected to get.
Is there a second? Seconded by Dick. Okay. Jane.
Yeah.
Jane, you're muted.
Unmute yourself, please, Jane.
Jim?
There you go. No, you just muted yourself again. While Jane's figuring that out, Lindsay, would you like to say?
No, please wait. Jane's ready.
Okay, is it there?
Yes.
Thank you. So I appreciate the discussions around this, and I would appreciate being able to have made this motion. I am the person who has brought up this topic.
We are running late, and I accepted the motion from Jim because we needed something concrete to discuss. If you have,
I've done that. You have put me in the position of discussing things without getting me on the agenda properly. I wanted to be able to discuss this.
This is on the agenda properly. It's item 10B, and we are running late. If you want to speak in favor or in opposition to the motion, please do.
I'll wait until we get to the future agenda items, which includes giving people proper credit and the ability to make a motion when they give the ideas to the board. Thank you.
That next thing on the agenda, but right now, this is the time for discussing the pros and cons of the motion. Would you like to discuss the pros or cons of this motion? Lindsay, go ahead and then Lee.
I'm not really gonna get into much discussion, but I will adamantly oppose at this point putting something like this as a mandate for parents to allow kids in school only if they have that immunization. So I just wanted to state that.
Lee is next and then John.
Okay, well, I will adamantly support it. But my other comment about this is we have to be careful about wording because this can be taken care of at the VSBA level probably, but COVID-19 is the disease. The virus that we're immunizing against is SARS-CoV-2. Okay, so it probably is listed as a SARS-CoV-2 vaccine. And that actually allows for all variants to be considered and all that other stuff. At some point, they're going to designate COVID-21 as the Delta variant because it's that COVID-19 stands for coronavirus disease 2019. That's over. We're on coronavirus 2021. So we should be careful about that wording. I think the wording should be called SARS-CoV-2 viral vaccines.
Thank you. I imagine Jim will act accordingly. John Wilson is next.
I have a vague memory of like 4 or 5 years ago, state law being passed about religious exemptions for vaccines and philosophical exemptions. Is that, can someone provide any insight on that? And will that render any of this moot if there are, people can claim philosophical exemptions?
My guess is that the legislation probably would add the virus that we just described to the list of things that immunization is required for, and probably wouldn't change whatever exceptions are. I don't know. Let's see who's next here. Melanie.
Yeah, I mean, this whole thing makes me somewhat uncomfortable. I really want all kids vaccinated. I don't know that school boards should be getting involved in students making medical decisions. However, I do think that going through the schools, and if school communities want to mandate it, that's up to the school communities to work within those boundaries. I think there's still going to be huge amounts of pushback. I'd love to see more of a medical community getting on board behind this. And, if the medical providers across the state are asking for students to be able to get this kind of care below the ages of 18, I think that opens up a whole new kind of can of worms. And I just want to, make sure it's consistent. Like I said, I do like it going through the school system, being required much better than I think we should be letting students kind of go behind parents' back to do it. I think that's just a tricky thing to advocate for, but I don't really know. I am not in the medical profession, and this is way out of my boundaries.
Folks, it's now 10 minutes of 9. We have to have an executive session at some point. I'm wondering, do we want to keep on discussing this, or would someone like to postpone this item till the next agenda? What's your pleasure?
Isn't the meeting November 5th in like a couple weeks that Jim would be speaking about this?
There is.
I'm happy to suggest we table this.
Do you want to table it, or do you want to postpone it precisely to the next meeting?
Okay, let's postpone.
So Jim moves that we postpone this item to our next meeting, which is November 2nd. Is there a second? Is there a second? Jeff, okay. All right, all those in favor of postponing this till the meeting of November 2nd, please raise your hand. All those opposed to postponing, please raise your hand. Appears to be 6-1 with some abstentions. Motion passes, and therefore this item is postponed until I already said that there appear to be some abstentions because there are some folks that raised their hand neither time. So this is postponed until the November 2nd meeting. All right, future agenda items. Jane has one she would like to put on the agenda, I think. Go ahead, Jane.
Hello? Can you hear okay? Okay. So I would like to make a recommendation that we talk about how persons that are bringing in ideas to the board are credited in the minutes, and that they're given the opportunity to make a motion. Thank you.
I would say everyone has the opportunity to make a motion. It's the job of the chair to recognize a hand up and to call on that person. Anything else for future? Oh, I'm sorry, Jane, do you want to say something else?
I'm talking about that, for instance, like there's 3 things this evening, I must say, I brought up months ago. It would be nice to be given the opportunity. I had even mentioned back at those times that I was ready to make a motion. I was asked not to. So I'm just saying, I'm used to being on boards where also chairs will also help support the person in making a motion when they're the person bringing in the idea. Thank you.
Anybody else want to speak to future agenda items?
Chair.
I've listed the board chair's report there. What I intend to do is hopefully for the November meeting to actually draft some recommendations that would be the second motion based on that report. All right, we're now into our second public comment time. Celeste, do we have any public at this point?
We do not.
Okay,
Who was Dina?
that's
Yeah.
our,
That's the next,
item. Okay.
Okay.
and on the next item, I'd like to make a motion.
Go ahead.
Okay, I hereby move that the board finds, this is a 2-part motion. I hereby move that the board finds that the premature general public knowledge of confidential attorney-client communications made for the purpose of providing professional legal services to the board would place the board at a substantial disadvantage. That's the first motion.
Second.
Okay, seconded by Dick.
I'm sorry. I know we're running late, but can you read that one more time, Jim? I'm not sure I quite understand what you said.
Yeah, I hereby move that the board finds that the premature general public knowledge of confidential attorney-client communications made for the purpose of providing professional legal services to the board would place the board at a substantial disadvantage. So premature general knowledge would put the board at a disadvantage.
It allows it allows us to consult with our lawyer, and it provides the rationale to then go into executive session.
Right. The second motion will make it a little clearer.
So, Dick, can I treat what you said as a second to the motion?
Yes.
Right. So the motion is just to adopt Jim's view of the situation. Basically, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. And Jim, you will follow up motion?
Yes, based upon the previous finding by the board, that last statement, I hereby move that the board enter executive session pursuant to 1 VSA section 313A1F and invite the board's legal counsel and the superintendent.
Second.
Okay, motion made and seconded to enter executive session for that purpose. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of entering executive session for that purpose, could you please raise your hand? Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. Unanimous vote to enter executive session, so only the elected board members and our legal counsel and the superintendent should remain then. And we turn off the recording.